Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for joining me at the Life in the Wick podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Spalding, and today I am joined by two of my very favorite people. One is Tamara Merrill.
Hi.
Jerry Stravey. Both have published multiple books, and in my sort of life surrounded by creative people, one of the things I regularly get asked about is that. How do you start to write a book? And so I said, I know some people who write. And I got them to come in, and we were going to do a series of 3 podcasts. Today, our subject is the 5 things you need to do to write a book. So we're going to try and keep it short and sweet for you today, get you a little bit motivated to get your pen out and get to work. So first, I thought let's have them tell you a little bit about. So just a couple of sentences. Tamara, what do you write? How long have you been writing?
I'm currently writing a mystery. I write a lot of historical fiction. I've written 1 thriller. I've written many short stories. And I've been writing since I was 9 years old. I was first published in American Magazine when I was 9 years old, and I've been writing ever since.
What about you, Jerry?
Well, I don't have that legacy of writing that Tamara has. I mean, that's pretty special. I haven't been writing that long, really, maybe about 5 years. And mostly fiction. I started with a historical dystopia, which is three book epic, and then I've got another story that's going into a sequel now, First Spouse of the United States. And so I've also written some nonfiction. Recently wrote a whistleblower book about the VA, and then a collection of sea stories for some Marines that wrote some stories, and we put that together. So a little bit of a collection, a novella, and a short story. So that's it.
Perfect. All right. Okay, so lots of people think they're going to write the next great American novel. And there are just some basic steps that you have to take. So like I said, we're not going to get too in depth today, but here's the 5 things that you need to do to write a book. So, okay, Tamara, what's the first thing?
Well, when you're inspired to write a book, the very first thing you need to do is identify your target.
What do you mean, identify your target?
You need to know why you're writing this book and who you're writing it for. Are you writing this book only for yourself? Are you writing this book to give to your children? Are you writing this book for your family? Are you writing this book for publication?
So the first thing you need to do is kind of figure out who the reader is going to be. Who's your audience for the book? And is there any kind of crossover, so my grandmother wrote a book. It never went any further than just our family. It was like a family book. But is it possible to write a book that you think is just for your family and then turn it into something?
Absolutely. You see best-selling memoirs all the time, which are basically books that you may have written just for yourself or for your family. But if you have a story to tell and you tell it well, it may actually be very publishable and become a bestseller.
So when you're writing, is that something that you should think, like maybe my audience is bigger, or do you think it's better to just kind of narrow in on who you're writing for in that first?
I think it's important to narrow in on who you're writing for, because you can expand, but it's hard to contract. They are our babies, and it's really hard to throw away words. So if you start with the narrow target that you think this book is, let's say you were writing your diary or your journal, okay? So you think your journal is only for yourself, and then you become, I don't know, you get famous. You become totally Tiffany. And we find her diary under her bed, and we decide
Am I still alive when you find it?
Sure, she's still alive. And we pull it out and we go, oh, people would like to know this. And because it tells a story, it's publishable, and it can be made into the format, even though it was meant only for yourself in the beginning.
Okay. So, but narrowing it in, you think, is a better way?
Narrowing in is better, because it's easier to go wide later than it is to pull back.
Okay. So our first thing is identify our audience. All right, Jerry, what's the number 2 thing that you need to do to write your book?
Get started.
Just get started.
Yeah,
Sit
get
down
started.
And get started.
Mm-hmm.
So what motivates people to get started?
Well, I'll just start with my own story. I had been writing, well, I'm not writing, I'd been thinking up stories from the very beginning when my kids were really young and they were lying in bed, getting ready to go to bed at night. I would just make stuff up spontaneously. They remember those stories to this day. I don't. I forgot them. And so, okay. So anyway, fast forward. All my life I've been making up stories, and again, not writing them down. I finally got to the point. I said, this is crazy. Spending all this time coming up with these stories, and they're good, of course, because I thought them up. I decided to start writing. So one day I sat down, started writing, and 4 months later, I had 140,000 words ready to go.
So that was your motivation. You were carrying these stories, and you were motivated to get them out, and because your kids remembered them, but you didn't. You wanted to remember them. You wanted those down.
Yeah, I wanted to remember them, and maybe it's kind of like what Tamara was saying. My reason might have been part of a legacy, okay? Because I had forgotten it, and I just thought there was a story to tell. And sometimes it goes deeper. Like, for instance, in my stories, all of them have there's a theme. And we'll talk about that later in another session, but all my stories have pretty much the same theme, and there's a reason. There's an emotional and visceral reason
for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tamara, are there other reasons besides just wanting to get the stories in your head? I say just, like it's a big deal, not like to discount that. But besides getting the stories in your head down on paper, are there other reasons you think? Are there other motivators for people to write?
Sure, there's a ton of motivators. For some people, it's as simple as money or fame. Those are just buzzwords for what you really want out of it. The bottom line is always that you have something that you want to contribute. You have a message, whether it's the messages to yourself or whether the messages to the world. There's a message in what you're writing that you are, there's not a book you read or an article you read that isn't trying to say something.
Right.
So it's getting your message out there.
Getting your message out there. And so whether you're motivated, what you think at that level, you might think that you're motivated by money or fame. Legacy is probably a good thing. Like that's the same, right? You're trying to get your message out to your family or whatever. Remembering your story. So there's a number of motivations for doing it. So maybe if you're having a hard time starting, it would be a good idea to do a little exercise about your motivation.
Yep. Think about why you want to write it. Back to Jerry talking about what motivated him to write. I was published when I was 9 years old. The reason I was published when I was 9 years old is because I loved Betsy Tacy and Tib books. And those of you that have read them know that Betsy had this big trunk and she wanted to write like her uncle wrote. And I was enamored with her and I wanted to write like Betsy wrote. So that was really what I needed to do, was I needed to publish something so I could prove I could do it.
Was your motivation?
It's my motivation.
Prove I can do this, right?
Prove I can do it.
Right? Okay. So we know we have to identify our audience, and we know we have to just start, which includes identifying your motivation. What is the third thing, Tamara? What's the third thing that people need to be aware of?
Once you start writing, you're going to discover you need a support group. Whatever that looks like for you. So for many people who are beginning writers, they find their first support group with a class that they took on writing, with a teacher that they liked in the 9th grade, whatever it is when you start writing. But you need to find a support group. And as you get deeper into your writing, you'll want a group of your peers who write not necessarily in the same genre, but it is helpful sometimes to have people in the same genre. You cannot be in a writer's group where you write adult fiction and everyone else writes children's books, because they're two very different kinds of things. But you look for a writer's group, which normally meet just once a month, and you are obligated to write a certain number of words and send it out and come to the meeting where everyone looks at it and critiques it. So getting the kind of support that is like a mentor holding your hand is so motivating. You have this obligation to get those words on paper and show up, and it keeps you going.
So for those of you who have been following along with Totally Tiffany for a while, we talk about doing anything, specifically in that world, about organization, but the steps are kind of the same so far, right? Like, why are you doing this? Who are you doing this for? And just get started. And what you're talking about is what we call going public. Once you tell somebody that you are going to do something, then you have that obligation to do it.
Hold your feet to the fire.
Right. It makes you like, oh gosh, I got to meet a deadline. So Jerry, What other kind of groups do you think are important for people in this, like when you're starting to write? What else would you recommend?
Well, one of my favorite approaches to learning to do a better job writing is to get around other people who are writing in the industry, like maybe some publishers or some editors or some marketeers or people that are doing things in the industry that you need to be aware of, things that you want to know more about. You'll find that a lot of these people, too, because they are out there really kind of networking and they want you to know what they can do for you to help get your book out there, they will share a lot with you. And it's just it can be incredibly enlightening, and it's a nice sense of community, because we talk a lot about, you hear a lot about writers being lonely and by themselves, Well, let's face it, most of the time writing, you're by yourself and you're doing it, right? It's an opportunity to get out there amongst people who are interested in the industry, who are interested in what you're doing. I find it, I find it very reassuring, and it's nice to have other people out there which you can share with.
Perfect. So,
much like paper crafting, we have all sorts of conventions and all sorts of meetings that you can go to. So there are motivating groups on Facebook. There are motivating groups on Instagram. Pinterest is full of writers' prompts and writers' groups that are online. Just find a group of your peers and get out there and associate with them.
So it is true. I mean, like you said, going back to paper crafting, we love to go and be together and do our craft and talk about our craft and learn from others what they're doing. And it's a very similar process here, right? Like, just find people who are doing things that you can learn from. It might not be the actual writing, but just get educated about the industry. And those groups are trade groups. I mean, is there a national group?
Well, interestingly enough, I am involved in a local group, and they are just made up of those people that I was talking about, and that is just a local group. I find the fact that if I can get out there and go face to face and talk to people, I'm going to get more out of it than necessarily if you don't have that opportunity to be face to face. But then I'm a member of an organization that is in England, and we meet once a month, and I get their perspective on writing, and it's a really interesting interchange. So you can do it both ways. The whole idea is, it's a lifestyle. Writing, if you want it to be, is a lifestyle, and you will flourish on so many different levels. And these are just some of the ways that you can do that.
Perfect. All right, so there's a lot out there. Okay, so number 1, identify your audience. Number 2, get started. Number 3, get a support group. All right, Jerry, what's number 4?
Rewrite. Okay, yeah.
What? So you're telling me that if I sit down and write my story, that it's not done?
Yeah, I think this is where we're going to lose a lot of people, because they think they've written it once, right? And it's done.
And it's great.
Yeah, of course it's great. Oh, yeah?
Right? Yeah.
Okay, all right. Real quick, I'm going to tell you a story about a rewrite. I wrote that first 140,000 words I was telling you about, right? I sent it to my editor. Guess what? She sends it back to me, and she says, this is awful. It reads like Wikipedia. OMG. I went, oh, my goodness.
So good, though.
Yeah, it was great.
What's wrong with her?
And
did you want to get a new editor then? Did you be like, she doesn't know? Or did you think, she does know and I need to listen to her?
Well, I can't tell you what my initial thoughts were, but those are things you don't share. So I went back and I started reading it, and I said, this reads like Wikipedia. And so anyway, rewrite. There's a lot to rewriting, a whole lot to rewriting. And I used to think it wasn't that important, just send it out. Well, I tell you what, from experience, rewrite. Go back and start from the beginning. And tomorrow's going to get a little bit into more of this on the details of the rewriting but I've got a book that I'm getting ready to release in March, and I've probably already been through it 5 or 6 times, and I'm going to be rereading it again before I send it out to one of my editors, only because I'm respecting not only my editors, but I'm respecting my readers and myself. I want it done properly. So if you embrace it, make it part of who you are and what you're doing, take pride in it, rewriting is something that you want to do.
You get excited about. I can't imagine. What do you think, Tamara? Number 5. What is number 5 in the list?
Rewrite again and again and again. Stephen King, who we all know, and he's certainly a prolific writer and a very, very good writer, even if you don't read horror. He also writes a lot of things that aren't horror, and so he's extremely renowned. He his entire mantra is rewrite, 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 and it's the one thing I can say is you need to rewrite it. And every single time you touch it, you're going to be surprised how much better it gets and better it gets, which also leads us to the next part, which is somewhere you have to stop. So when you're rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, there is a time when you need to actually say, okay, let me move on to the next part here. Because your whole reason you're thinking about this is I'm committed to writing a book. And the way you write a book is you have to get to the end and write that little final E at the bottom that says this book is completed.
I want to share one more thing about rewriting that makes it more palatable. And that is, you've gone through the process, you've rewritten and rewritten, but you know that you need to do it again. Step away from it for a while.
Oh, yes.
Take a couple weeks, maybe a month, maybe 6 weeks or whatever, but step back. It's going to do a couple things. It's going to, shall we say, restore your confidence in what you've written by the fact that you don't hate looking at it. And the other thing it's going to do, you've got stuff, whirling around in the back of your brain all the time. And when you come back to it, not only will you be fresher and feeling better about it, but you'll have more to work with because it has been going around in your head, and you will profit from rewriting it again.
All right. Okay, so here's what we've got. Number 1.
One, identify your audience.
Number 2.
Get started.
Number 3.
Find a support group.
And number 4 and 5.
Rewrite.
Okay, so these are the basic steps. These are the things that you need to consider, put some thought into, and then you can jump into writing your book. So I hope you have enjoyed this brief podcast with Tamara Merrill and Jerry Stravey. And we will be doing 2 more. The next one is process. Like, how do you actually do it? Like, what are the step-by-step? What's the step-by-step process? So if we've intrigued you with these first 5 things and you want to know more about those, look for that second podcast to come out. And then our third podcast, we're going to talk about marketing, which is probably the biggest and most important thing about being successful as a writer. If you are determining success on selling your books versus just doing something for your family. So you're definitely going to want to tune in and hear the ideas about that as well. So Tamara and Jerry, thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to have you. I'm looking forward to our next couple of podcasts. It should be really fun.
Great.
Thanks, Tiff.
See
Bye,
ya.
everybody.
Bye.